with Source Allies. We're a technology consulting company. We are based out of Des Moines, Iowa. So I'm a Midwestern girl. Educationally speaking, I have a bachelor's in math and economics and a minor in computer science. I got my MBA from Iowa State University. Yeah, go Cyclones. I have held what feels like every job you can have in IT, from developer to data scientist, BA to Scrum Master. I've tried a little bit of everything. I'm really passionate about good strategy and good execution and delivery. So that's what I do now for Source Allies. I help our clients deliver better, faster, stronger. On a personal note, big board game fan. I'm an avid audiobook listener of what I call the leadership self-help genre. So think management, leadership, communication, feedback. I, on a really personal note, am an introvert and I have anxiety. I was born in an Iowa nice culture, is what we call it. So giving feedback did not come naturally to me. It was very hard. I was very nervous about it. So I put that audiobook habit to good use, and I read a lot of books, listened to a lot of podcasts on feedback, and I even have a little handout if you come find me after that links to a lot of my favorite resources. So if you don't get enough from me, definitely come grab one of these, and there's some really great content on there. And it also tells you how to connect with me. But that's a little bit about me. I'm going to tell you what I've learned and how to put it into practice, but I want to know a little bit about you. And don't worry, this is just a raise your hand if kind of situation. I'm not going to call on anyone. I want you to raise your hand if you intentionally try to hurt your coworkers' feelings. Anyone? One guy. Maybe you don't want to work with him. We might have some feedback for you after. That's the first time anyone's ever raised their hand when I asked that question. I was hoping to go 100%. All right, raise your hand if you would want to know if you offended someone. Yeah, most of us are not out here trying to offend someone, so we want to know. Raise your hand if you would want someone to tell you if you were doing something they thought was holding back your career. Yeah, me too. I have blind spots. I know I'm not seeing everything about what I'm doing. I want someone to tell me. And what I find kind of ironic is I've asked this question a lot, and everybody raises their hand that they want feedback, but when it comes to giving that feedback, we get a little nervous, and we don't always do it as often as we could or should. So I hope you leave today feeling more confident in how you give feedback, more comfortable in how you structure those conversations so that you'll do it more often. So the question I promised I'd answer is, does how you give feedback matter? And I have a couple stories that help answer that question for me. So before I worked at Source Allies, I had a really great boss. Her name was Sydney. I was working as a data scientist at the time, and she sat me down like mid-year review season, and she said, Whitney, you really need to work on your rapport. You come into these meetings with your stakeholders, you have great analyses to present, you know your stuff, but you are just down to business to the point you almost don't even say hello. Like you're coming off cold, and you're not gonna go as far as you could if you learned how to connect with people quickly and develop relationships. And that was career-changing feedback for me. I learned how to small talk after that. I watched a Udemy course on rapport. I learned how to give an elevator pitch. I became so much warmer at the beginning of the meeting because I wasn't even thinking about it. I just was like there to tell them something, and I wanted to tell them that thing. And she told me that feedback in a really caring way, and it has made a lot of difference. I would not be as good at what I do today if it were not for Sydney's feedback. On the other hand, I've had some not so great feedback given to me in my career. I was leading a team, and our team got moved under a new leader, and whenever I would meet with her, she would say things like, you're gonna have to communicate better on this one. You're gonna have to come off your island. And I could not figure out what that meant. It's like, I can think of a dozen ways to change my communication. Am I communicating too much, too little, to not enough people, to too many people? Is it the wrong format? And a lot of these are opposites of each other. So I could have changed it in the completely wrong direction. So I finally emailed her because I wanted the answer in writing. And I said, I am so down for feedback. Like, I want you to tell me how I can improve. And you've made a lot of these comments, and I just don't understand what I need to do differently. So if you can give me an example where I didn't communicate well enough, or I should have collaborated better, I would love for you to talk to me about it. But if you can't, I really want these comments to stop, because the comments themselves are not helping me. And the email stopped the comments. So I still don't know if I had a problem, guys. All that did was hurt my self-esteem for a while and made me not really want to work with her. It didn't help me grow. I don't know what I could have done differently. So if you ask me, does how you give feedback matter? Yes, it does. Because good feedback changes careers. It builds better products. It makes teams more fun to work on. If you don't give feedback so well, it does the opposite of those things. And it can really just make it a not fun environment. But you don't have to take my word for it. This is my dog. His name is Pumbaa. He's adorable, obviously. Pumbaa's been on his own feedback journey over the years. Pumbaa gives great feedback to humans. You can tell. He wants me to pet him in this picture. Obviously, he didn't bark. If he wants his blanket, he just marches back and forth between me and the closet the blanket's stored in until I go get it for him. He knows how to get what he wants. Pumbaa's not so great with other dogs. This is a picture from his doggy daycare. So you can see there's like a high level of enthusiasm when he's around four-legged friends. And so one day, my husband and I, who is here, by the way, and I'm going to point him out, one, because he has these little handouts if you want to get them, and two, because I'm told if you know what he looks like, this story's better. So he's about 6'2". It's important. We are walking the dog, Pumbaa. We decided to go to Starbucks, get him a pup cup, come back. And we unfortunately live in a neighborhood where a lot of people do not leash their dog. And so we're walking home, and this giant Newfoundland, a big, big dog, Pumbaa's 15 pounds, comes up and wants to say hi. And the owner's like in their yard, and they're like, oh, she's a gentle giant. She just wants to say hello. It's fine, it's fine. And so we're standing there, like letting them sniff each other. And Pumbaa, not the biggest fan of this interaction. So eventually, big, giant Newfoundland gets bored, starts to walk away. And Pumbaa yaps and is like, I didn't like what you just did to me. Newfoundland pivots around, starts going for Pumbaa. My poor husband has him on the leash. Pumbaa's in this harness you see here. The only way to get him out of the clutches of this giant dog is to lift him in the air by the leash and start spinning him around like he's on a carousel, while the owner is like frantically running, trying to get their dog. And so Pumbaa learned that day that how you give feedback matters. Everyone was fine. He's totally fine. Does great around big dogs now. But it was a little bit traumatic for him for a while. So we're going to talk about how to give good feedback, because it does matter. And I do think it's helpful to recognize that there are two types of feedback, and the things we're going to talk about, they work for both. But it does help me anyway to think about what type of feedback I'm giving to prepare for that conversation. So one type is task feedback, and that is you're giving feedback on a thing someone did. So it may be you said 27 times during your demo, or it might be I had a hard time understanding your report, but whatever it is, there's a thing someone did and you are giving feedback on the thing they did. There's also interpersonal feedback, And this one I find is a little bit tougher for some people, me especially. We get a little more nervous about it, but it relates to how we work together. So that feedback might look like, I feel unappreciated when you said, insert the statement, or the language you used in that meeting was offensive to me. And that's important feedback to give to make it a healthy working relationship, but it's feedback that can feel a little intimidating sometimes. And before we get into how to structure your feedback, I think this is the most important slide in the whole deck. So if you take nothing else away, remember this. This is a concept from Carol Robbins, who's a Stanford professor. A podcast with her is linked on my little sheet. One of the best podcast episodes I've ever listened to. So another plug to get the sheet. But she talks about how between any two people, there's always three realities present. So if I'm talking to you, there's my intent, my background, my history, everything that makes me who I am today is in my reality. Only I can know that and my intent unless I tell you. On your side, there's your culture, background, history, everything that makes you who you are today and the impact that this is having on you. Only you can know that part unless you say it out loud. And then there's our shared reality, and that's what was actually said and what was actually done. That one we both know. So in any situation, you can only know two of the three. So if you're giving feedback to someone, you don't get to talk about what their intent was because you don't know it. Same as I wouldn't get to talk about the impact I had on you because I don't know it. So it's really helpful when you're thinking about how to structure your feedback and what to say to make sure you're sticking to the two realities you know. So now we're going to get into how do you actually say this. So I would encourage you to think about the last feedback you gave or the last feedback you wanted to give and maybe didn't, and apply this formula to it as we go through it to see if it helps you with your conversation. So over the years, I've come up with 5 elements that make feedback good. One is your intent, one is your fear, if you have one, when, what, and impact. So let's get into some examples. We'll start with task first. This is real feedback I've given to people while I work at Source Allies. So I had feedback I was giving someone on a blog post they had written. It's a pretty common thing for us as a company to post things on our blog or on AWS's blog, and I was giving feedback on what they'd written. So I started with my intent, which this is a really great way to let someone know, hey, we're on the same side here. And again, I'm speaking, so they can't know my intent if I don't tell them. I want readers to be impressed by the work you did. Let them know, like, hey, I'm in this for a positive reason. If you have a fear, say it. I'm afraid you're going to dismiss my idea. Just getting it out there makes it less likely to happen. If you're not afraid of anything, just don't make something up. But this will help kind of just clear the air. When, in the introduction and results section of your blog post, so again, being really specific about what we're talking about here, continues into the what. Use a lot of technical language that requires advanced knowledge of your topic. And then the impact, so again, this is the part they can't know if I don't tell them, was I was getting lost in those sections. I anticipate a lot of business-focused readers not being able to follow along. So again, this is task feedback. I feel like this one people don't have quite as hard a time with, but it still helps to structure things in this way. And then if we look at interpersonal feedback, again, real feedback I've given. This is about feeling dismissed in a retro. So starting with the intent. I respect you and I want to have a good working relationship. So you're giving tough feedback, but you're coming in letting them know, like, I care and I want us to work well together. And that really sets things up in a positive manner and is going to minimize people getting defensive. In this case, I did have a fear. I was afraid that me giving you this feedback was going to make you less likely to challenge my ideas in the future. And I wasn't giving the feedback because I wanted them to stop challenging me. It was just the way in which I was being challenged felt dismissive. In our retro yesterday, notice that that is a very specific meeting. It is not in retros all the time. We're usually in retro. We have one shared reality that when I'm talking to someone, we can both picture. So make sure you're both picturing the same thing and you are very clear on where you were, what was said, what was done. So what you said my idea for a process would never work because our stakeholders wouldn't change. So again, very clear on what was said, just the facts, not putting any spin on it. And then the impact is I felt discouraged because we were blaming the stakeholder and not searching for a solution. So again, that's the part they wouldn't know if I didn't tell them. We're gonna go through some do's and some don'ts when you're thinking about what to say with your feedback or how to say it. The first is consider your timing. And there's a couple of things here that you wanna think about. The first is being prompt. So if you try to give me feedback on this presentation 6 months from now, I'm not gonna remember how it went. That shared reality, it's gonna be a little fuzzy for me. So try to tell me quickly while I can still remember what we're talking about. But at the same time, have you ever felt like someone kicked you while you were down? Or you were on a high and they just took you down a level? We wanna avoid that too. So if I get off this stage and you can tell I just think I killed it up here, maybe not the best time to tell me some critical feedback. You can message me, email me, reach out on LinkedIn a couple of days later when I've had time to get off the high. Or if I just get embarrassed and run off the stage, not a great time to tell me that wasn't so cool. Give me a couple of days and let me cool down. So make sure the person you're talking to is emotionally in a good spot where they're actually gonna hear what you say. And the easiest way to do that is to say, can I give you some feedback now? And see what they say. You wanna know your own intent, and this is part of that formula I shared, but it is so important to understand why you're giving the feedback. What is it you hope this person takes away? What are you trying to accomplish with it? Is if you don't get clear on that, I found for me, I have a tendency to get really critical or negative, but knowing why and that that's a positive reason really helps me craft what I'm saying. And then you want to be specific. And I can't talk about this enough. You have one shared reality. You both need to be thinking about the same one. So make sure what was said, what was done is very clear, and it's just the facts. You're not putting an emotional spin on it, so you're thinking of the same incident when you're talking. I also have a few don'ts, and I've lumped these together because they show up in similar ways. So you don't want to solution, assume, attribute motive, or describe the person, because remember, that's their reality, and you don't know what actually is going on over there. So you're gonna stick to your own. In some ways this can happen, as I've seen good intentions accidentally become offensive, and a great example is someone's not getting their work done on time, and so you wanna give them that feedback. And I see people want to solution, and so they immediately go to, well, if you're having trouble, I can coach you, or I can teach this to you. And you don't know that that's the problem. It might be they're having a rough time at home, or their grandma's sick. Something is affecting them that they haven't told you, and you have just offended them because the problem wasn't that they didn't know the material. It was something completely else entirely. So make sure you're sticking to what actually was happening in the impact on you. So in that case, the impact is I'm having to stay late to make up for the work you're not doing. Or I'm really nervous about presenting to clients because I don't know if things are gonna be done. It's what's actually affecting you that you wanna tell them. Don't say why someone did something. Who, what, when, where, how. Totally fine. Why they did it, again, you don't know. You can't say it because you don't know it. I've seen this show up in things like, Whitney, you scheduled that meeting at 8 a.m. and you knew I had to drop my kids off and you only did it because you didn't want me to be there. No, that wasn't why. If you had that feedback to give, it would just be, if you schedule meetings before 9, I have to drop my kids off and I can't make it, and I really want to be a part of the team. So could you please schedule them later? That's the feedback you have to give. But if you assume my intent, it's just going to make me get agitated and tense and defensive. And remember, I feel like you and I feel like that are not feelings. So I feel like you aren't listening and you aren't listening are the same sentence. So what really the feeling is I feel unheard. And that's more vulnerable to say, but good feedback requires an element of vulnerability. So what can you do now? You're probably thinking, this was really great, Whitney. I will use this the next time I have to give feedback, but I'm just going to shelve it until then. No. We have things you can do now. One is to create a culture of feedback and develop psychological safety. So you're going to really struggle within your workplace if people don't feel psychologically safe. They're just not going to want to give feedback. And one of the best ways to do that is to just assume positive intent. So when you don't know what someone's intent was, just assume it was a positive one. And people will start to feel safer. I've also seen psychological safety stuff be put in place where at the beginning of the meeting, you just set some simple statements like, we're going to be having a tough conversation today. And I want to make sure we're not blaming each other, we're not justifying our actions. I want us to really think about solutions. Just some simple statements at the beginning of an interaction can go a long way. Also, developing relationships can really help you give feedback better. I'm going to give the best feedback to the people I feel the safest with and have the deepest relationship with. So this is something you can start doing proactively. I've seen people do listening tours where they go around and ask people questions, get their opinions on things. One-on-ones are always great. I work in a flat company, so I don't have a manager. I don't have people that report to me. We're all on the same level. And I meet with everyone on my team one-on-one once a month just to check in. How are you doing? What's going on? Do you have any feedback for me? Do I have any feedback for you? And I think a lot of times we think about one-on-ones and that manager to employee relationship, and it doesn't have to be that. I highly encourage you, anyone you're interacting with regularly, set up a regular cadence just to check in. You can also do a team charter or a team building activity. And I have some questions here that are really great to go over as a group, especially early on when you're working, but it's never too late. So sharing your personal goals and asking for feedback just starts to normalize that feedback is a thing we're going to have to give each other. If we want to be a healthy, functioning team, we're going to need to let people know what we're doing well. We're going to need to let each other know when we step on our toes. And let's start talking about that. And so just saying, hey, I'm working on this and I would really like feedback from you is a great way to just kind of break the ice. Discussing emotional triggers sounds super deep. And I've done it with a lot of people, and they always tell me this was so great. I'm so glad you made me do this. And so just everyone has those things that they get irrationally angry about. And you can't know what they are until they tell you. So just getting that out of like, yeah, for some reason, this just really sets me off. I highly value autonomy, and so if someone touches my code without me knowing, it just sets me off. Whatever it is, knowing that, you'll be like, oh yeah, I'll give you a heads up next time. Make sure you're explaining how you prefer to receive feedback. Again, just to normalize, we're gonna do this. Most people have a, like kind of similar things they prefer, like the we need to talk message. I don't know anyone that really loves that because you feel like you're getting broken up with. But just letting people know, hey, I want it as soon as possible. If you send me a message saying you have some feedback for me, please try to meet with me that day. Just knowing that about someone and their preferences can help. Some people are like, if you could send it to me like in an email and give me 2 days to process and then we meet, that just helps me. So this can make you feel more comfortable and ready because you know you're approaching them the way they want to be approached. And then Finally, you can host feedback practice sessions. So when I do these, we call them Scary Whitney as a service. And we have a thing in our company called Monday meetups, where over the lunch hour on Monday, anyone can sign up to give a talk to the company. And I'll sign up for Scary Whitney as a service. We'll spend the first few minutes talking about feedback, what makes it good, what's on people's minds. Sometimes it's how to ask for feedback, how to give it. And then I'll have 3 to 6 pre-crafted scenarios for people to practice giving feedback to me. And I will let them choose the level of scary they want. So sometimes they're like, just be nice to me. I'm new at this. And we'll go through it, and then the whole group will give them feedback on how they could have improved. Sometimes they're like, be as scary as you can, and I just like break down on them. So then they know the worst has happened. They're never gonna get anything more irrational than Whitney was. And it's just a good way to get used to framing these things. It's a muscle, you have to build it, and you need to practice. And if you are nervous about giving someone feedback, grab a friend, message me on LinkedIn, just work through it, and saying it out loud once will really help you make sure you're not falling into any of those traps of solutioning, blaming, assuming their intent. So I hope you have realized feedback is important. You have some tips and tricks for how you're going to structure it in the future. And you have some things you can start doing today before you even need to have to give feedback to make it easier when you eventually do. So I hope you connect with me on LinkedIn. I hope you grab one of my sheets and check out some of my resources. And thank you so much for having me out to Boston.